There we go. Or to get the recording at the end. So we're absolutely delighted that so many people are keen to hear more about this very exciting collaboration. So we have just hit 5 o'clock, and while these guys are speaking, I know Tom's doing a great job on the waiting room, but when they're talking, if there's anyone else to let in, I will do the hosting in that side. So for those of you who've joined us this evening, my name's Claire. I work at Steplab, having previously been a trust leader. I get to interview Tom and Josh today about a collaboration that we've come up with between Walkthrus and Steplab. So without further ado, let's start with some brief introductions. So Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Yes, my name's Tom Sherrington, and I'm the co-author of the Walkthrus books that I wrote with Oliver Caviglioli. I used to be a teacher a long time ago and head teacher for a few years. And last few years, I've been working mainly with schools, developing their PD programs, doing lots of training in schools, and making the Walkthrus books into a website and a product for schools to use. So that's, and I'm going to be telling you about this really exciting link up with Steplab. Can't wait to tell you all about it. And
Josh.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. So my name is Josh Goodrich. I am currently an English teacher and a deputy principal at a school in darkest northeast London called AIM Academy North London up in Enfield. But I'm also the co-founder and I'm the CEO of an organisation called Steplab. Steplab is the other half of this really exciting partnership, which again, we'll have a chance to talk to you about later on in the call.
So we have a number of questions for this afternoon, lots of them to do with what does it look like when you're using Walkthrus and Steplab, but also a little bit about what does great PD look like and what tools are provided by Walkthrus and Steplab to really supercharge teaching in schools. So to start off with, I think we will have a look at what actually is Walkthrus. Tom?
Okay, are you going to can you do the admitting while I do this bit?
I will do the admitting, yes.
Lots of people flowing in, it's great. Okay, so Walkthrus is essentially a set of techniques which are defined in 5 steps. And it started off life as a book where we decided we wanted to curate all the ideas that get shared at PD sessions, at conferences, online, and all these books. We're thinking, well, can we curate that so that schools have got one place to go where the core techniques are kind of captured? And then using a visual guide, it's important that they are a visual guide so that you've got a kind of thing to engage with visually, which helps you study it and get involved in what the ideas might look like. And step by step so that you can break things down into things which you can rehearse and learn. So we developed the Walkthrus books, and then we realized that people would be asking us to go in and do training at schools. And we thought, well, we can't go to every school that asks us. So let's make resources so people can run their own training. That was our original thought. Let's make some videos, let's make some slides, let's make some sheets and tools for teachers to use during their PD. So it started off thinking, let's make a toolkit for teachers to run their own training. So they don't have to pay people to go in and do, visiting speaker costs and stuff. And then once we realized that was popular, we developed a whole range of other things around that. And we branded it originally as a guide to instructional coaching. But actually, really, what we have made is a toolkit for running professional development in schools. So I think we feel that our instructional coaching aspect is probably a slightly marginal use of Walkthrus compared with how many schools use it just for running their PD, which is slightly different. And I would say most of the schools that have joined Walkthrus are not doing one-to-one instructional coaching yet, but they are doing it more for their whole school PD, their team sessions, and the coaching is sort of, some is here and there, and some schools are doing it, but most aren't. Should I just briefly show you, kind of for those of you who have literally no idea what it looks like? I don't know how people on the call, how many of you will know what it looks like. I'll just really a 2 minutes. So basically, the books are these books. So they look like this. And within each page of the book is a 5-step guide to a technique. And we feel that techniques are helpful because they don't really constrain people. They don't just say, you must follow these rules. They're basically a framework for thinking about how to conceive of an idea and then communicate it in a coherent way. But then every teacher who then gets that idea always has to put it into their context. And we do a lot of work about talking about adapting for your context. The website then is a way of, if I just share the screen there, as a way of accessing the toolkit. So let's say, for example, this is one of the main bits of the website you get access to. It's in explaining and modeling, which is one of our categories, you've got access to all these different named techniques. And it's really helpful to go to a school where they know what worked examples and backward fading means, for example. And every single teacher, when you say worked examples and backward fading, has a sense of what that is. Or something like examples and non-examples, or let's say giving an explanation, which is quite a broad idea. Then you've got 5 steps to giving an explanation, which you can then use as a summary. Well, you read the book first and then you look at the summary. And associated with that are various tools like the trainer notes and the workbook for the teachers to fill in. But also we have explanatory videos and slide decks. So there's all these tools that you can use to support engagement with this, the idea of giving an explanation really well. Or something like in questioning and feedback, it might be something like something really, every day, like show me boards. And people might think, oh yeah, I know how to use show me boards. But when you go to a school where they've all done the training on the show me boards with the walkthrough, it's brilliant. You just see the technique so crisp, it's so clear. Teachers are using it when they need to. And their key thought process is, when do I use it? Rather than how do I use it? So that's what walkthroughs is. It's a way of describing the stuff we do all the time, the regular nuts and bolts of teaching, in ways which help you communicate it in a coherent way. And that's what we try to do. And that's essentially the feedback we get, that the shared understanding you get from using the walkthroughs is great. Everyone knows what you mean, and therefore you can get into how to do it well, rather than constantly having to explain what it is. Anyway, so that's my whistle-stop tour of what walkthroughs is.
But I think it's so important, isn't it? Because that's where good school improvement or good teacher development starts, is that common language and that codifying what it means to have great teaching. And I think what I really love about walkthroughs is how it starts with that codification. And then, as you've just talked about, how it's evolved over time to meet the needs of schools as they've tried to bring this in. And I think that's so important, that closing the gap between what is it to have great teaching, how do you make it happen, why and where might that happen, and of course the steps there, which just by the very names themselves can see why this collaboration with Steplab makes so much sense. So Josh, tell us a little bit about Steplab.
Sure. Well, I might start off by talking a bit more about why Steplab before we talk about what Steplab is. So I have found, both as a teacher who's trying to learn and get better, especially earlier in my career, but then also as a teacher educator, that basically change for teachers is incredibly difficult to achieve. And actually most teachers experience professional development in schools that just doesn't really do anything for what they actually do in the classroom. I certainly found it really, really difficult to get better as a teacher. And actually one of the reasons why this partnership is so incredibly exciting is that there were, 10, 11, 12 years ago, there were a handful of people's work that I was actually reliant upon to improve. One of whose was Tom's, and his blogging, like still now, but back in the day, was like a bit mind expanding and actually enabled me to get better. So that's an aside. It's hard to get better as a teacher. And so what I've tried to do over the years is basically help schools to make this method of teacher development called instructional coaching work. And instructional coaching, which Tom mentioned earlier on, it is pretty difficult to get right. Like, it really works. In fact, there's evidence that it works better than pretty much anything else. But it's not, when I tried to make it happen in my schools, there were aspects of it which were really difficult for me to get right. And so what we've done at Steplab is we've looked pretty hard at the best available evidence around how teachers learn, and we've designed a system that helps schools to run PD based on helping teachers to make very precise changes to their practice, using modeling, using rehearsal, and that kind of precise changes modeled with a chance for teachers to rehearse stuff is kind of, in a nutshell, what we mean by instructional coaching. So it may be worth like to echo what Tom did, like a super quick tour around kind of like how our content looks on Steplab. And I think what it will do is also help to like show how great the walkthroughs content looks on Steplab in kind of like in counterpoint. So I'm gonna hopefully do the snazzy screen share thing that Tom showed me. Can you let me know if you can see my screen, because I don't trust it.
We can.
Okay, good. So what we're looking at here, that like Steplab is around tools that help people do coaching. That's what this coach button will take us to, but also help leaders to have data on whether the coaching program is working. And that's what this lead tab takes you to. But I'm not going to like click on that stuff now. I'm just going to quickly show you our library. So our library is like kind of similar to the walkthroughs. One is like, you know, major areas of teaching, like ensuring that students think and make effort when they're learning. And underneath that, we have some more precise areas. We have using questioning to generate thought, or using paired talk to hold students accountable for thinking hard. Let's say I click this one. And underneath that, we have these precise techniques, which have these kind of names that are memorable, rehearsed. Like, it's important to rehearse paired talk routines with students so they can do it really slickly. Now, what I did back in the day is I gave this to teachers, and it helped people to get better. It helped coaches to give more precise feedback. But over time, we've paired our action steps with a variety of different content, which helps coaches to do a really, really good job. For example, each action step here is paired with what we call a success criteria, which is around how you tell good from bad performance of a step so that people can work towards mastery. Paired with a model. We have thought, so that you can see teachers in a variety of contexts doing that. And it's paired with what we call a rehearsal task, so the coaches know exactly how to work with the teacher and give them feedback that helps them to change their practice. So I've given you a little tour there into like how our library works. But again, you know, just as Tom showed, there's content on a variety of different things in teaching. Likewise, if you're not a secondary teacher, or we also have the same content, but for early years in Key Stage 1. So that's kind of how the Steplab content works. And then it will be really exciting to show you how Walkthrus content looks on Steplab shortly.
Yeah, so that's a nice segue, Joshua, thank you. I was a trust leader who had a subscription to both Steplab and to Walkthrus across my trust. We use that for our PD. We use it for PD for, we actually use it for our teachers and our TAs and our support staff. But what was quite tricky sometimes was trying to bring those two things together. What that normally looked like was someone from my teaching and learning team kind of manually adapting some of the content on Steplab, or making references when talking through coaching with the Walkthrus books or with the platform and slides. So from my perspective, it was always quite tricky wanting to access both of these things and do so in a really effective way. But a lot of that work either had to happen by me and my teams at the school, or probably wasn't as seamless as we would have liked. So what this session is kind of about really is, what does it look like now if you have a school subscription to both Walkthrus and Steplab? So, Josh, I think we've got some nice examples on Steplab now.
Yes, I shouldn't have stopped sharing screen, really, should I? All right, I'll quickly take you for a little tour. Okay, so is that working?
Oh yeah.
Okay, lovely. So on Steplab, you'll be able to click the Walkthrus button, and obviously this is just looking in our library, but in reality, most of the people that engage with this will be coaches using the Walkthrus content to observe a lesson, set a Walkthrus action step, and then deliver that as feedback. That's not what I'm going to be able to show you now. I'm just showing you how it looks in our library. So you might decide that you want to set an action step around explaining and modeling. you might decide that this teacher needs help with types of explanations. And then we might decide that actually something really useful would be to help this science teacher possibly help students understand something abstract with really concrete models. And what we can see here is we have the wonderful, super digestible, beautifully presented Walkthrus 5 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We may decide that at a certain point we would ask students to the teacher to provide further concrete examples. And again, what you have here is you have the step with its title, you have the success criteria, you have the OliCav beautiful image so that people, the coaches and teachers can talk about this and understand the step in really concrete terms. And then you also have the Walkthrus kind of study guide, I guess. Tom, what would we call this?
I suppose we call it just the overview of the technique.
Okay, so you have the overview of the technique with the 5 steps together. So you're zooming out from the single step and looking at it, how it fits in the routine, with the information and all the walkthroughs, you know, the additional content so that people can see how the technique works. So that's kind of how the content will exist on Steplab.
So if I'm a coach and I'm sitting with my coachee and we're talking about the lesson in front of us, how does the you know, those library of both Steplab and Walkthrus walk together? Is it interchangeable? What can I do with that content? Josh?
Sure. Well, you know, Steplab is built to, as Tom said, like Walkthrus is kind of, Walkthrus can run your PD program more generally, right? You can use the Walkthrus content for lots and lots of different stuff. But, you know, Steplab is designed to help schools solve this one specific problem, which is around instructional coaching. So what would happen is the coach would be in a lesson and they'd be diagnosing what a teacher needs to work on as they observe that lesson. And Steplab guides the coach to do that. And then they'd be able to select a Walkthrus step. All the steps in all of Tom's Walkthrus books are included. And then they'll be able to set that step for a teacher and deliver it to them using modeling, using rehearsal in a way that would help the teacher change and guided by the tools that we have on Steplab. Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I see it working really well is this. So, I mean, my experience with this is that Walkthrus works within 3 levels. First of all, there's a whole school framework. So most schools are using Walkthrus, have done some whole school training so that there's some general awareness of, say, questioning techniques and the need for formative assessment techniques so that you are finding out how students are doing in real time during a lesson. Show me boards, cold calling, think, pair, share, process questions, all this, for example. Then teachers are normally in a team of some kind with an agenda. There might be the maths department in the secondary school, or there might be in year 3, and there's a team agenda as well. But then they need to enact the ideas they discuss at those levels as well as possible. And so where the coaching comes in is that the person working with an individual teacher is saying, right, so what's your agenda? What are you trying to do? What are your goals? And Josh has done some brilliant work on this whole thing about responsive coaching and goal setting and situation assessment. But where this will work is that rather than saying, let's get the Walkthrus out, the books out, and the online tools, if you've got Steplab, you're able to say, well, let's access this through Steplab, and which will allow you to record the step, follow up on the step, add feedback to the step. And the scripting that goes through the coaching conversations that Steplab offers will help someone who's less confident with coaching to do that. Whereas in our world at the moment, without Steplab, we have to train people to do coaching through using video and other things to get people learn how to do coaching. And that's the bit that schools find hardest. I mean, when we go in as consultants into schools, we do a lot of work with middle leaders and how to read the room in a classroom and how you might run a coaching session using this precise praise probe process from Banbrick Santoyo. Now, they might have access to Steplab and say, well, we get structured support for that process and access the same exact tools as we could have done with just the Walkthrus. And that's what's so great. It's like the bit where we find it hard to get traction and to get support just with what we have is exactly what Steplab provides. It's like, you don't have to think these 2 systems are sort of instead of, they just integrate. And that to me is excellent. So I'm really excited about that anyone who wants to go fully down the instructional coaching road of one-to-one coaching and wants to do it at scale with lots of people doing it, they don't just need to rely on the 3 or 4 expert coaches. They can get more people doing it because they can use a Steplab guidance to help them. That's the way I see it working.
I think that's exactly right, Tom. You know, like I built Steplab over a number of years because I can see on the call here some current Steplab users who are school leaders. And so, you know, like trying to make instructional coaching work in your school is just like leaping a variety of hurdles. You have all these coaches and like all this coaching's happening, but do you even know it's happening every week? Like how? You need data on that. You need data on whether the coaching's good. You need to make sure that coaches are like delivering feedback in the way that we, you know, think works. And so you need them to have guidance. They need to have training at their fingertips. These are kind of the leaders' problems which all school leaders have to overcome when they want to make instructional coaching work. And as you say, fantastic Walkthrus content put in a place which gives leaders the power to run a really impactful instructional coaching program, I think is just a really exciting combo.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I really like about Walkthrus is that cluster building, where you can kind of sequence in a very specific way. And I think what's going to be really lovely is being able to take that library of steps and sequence them on Steplab the way that you want them to be sequenced. I think that kind of customization and flexibility is so vital because, you know, all different schools have very different contexts. They want different nuances, and that level of customization that you then get, because I think I'm right in saying that you'll be able to fully customize the walkthrough steps and all those kinds of things, and which videos you add and which parts of the library you access in Steplab, that you can have that full flexibility. And I know there may be some people on this call who perhaps have had experience of coaching through other methods, perhaps that's through initial teacher training or ECF, where there's obviously a structured program. I think what's really lovely about having this much at your fingertips is that you can really structure the program you're using however you want it to look, without any restraints. And I think that is, I think that's really new in education. I had a conversation with someone not long ago about how often sometimes you can have programs where there isn't a level of flexibility or nuance or customization that means that a school really feels that they can own what they've bought into. And I think this is a really lovely way that people can. I know in the chat people are asking questions around, you know, can we do the coaching in different ways? Absolutely. I think that's always been the suggestion. I know, Tom, you talk a lot about team coaching, which is slightly different to like a one-to-one coaching. I think whatever schools want to do.
Exactly. So I think there's there's a lot to take on board here. And one of the things that we find that we work a lot on in schools is our cluster builder, which allows schools to identify core techniques that constitute their kind of the main things they want to focus on. And very often there's real power in that being quite, you know, a set across the whole school, because so the common language really forms. But then you still have to follow that through into teachers actually using those things. And the danger point for us is when people stop at the level of the heading and they just say, show me boards. Right, we're going to work on show me boards. I'm going to do show me boards. How am I good at show me boards? And we always have to remind people that there's no such thing as show me boards. There's the steps to show me boards. How do you use them well, and when do you use them well? That's the key. So if you're using show me boards, it's not binary, I am or I'm not. You're doing it well, you're responding to what you see, you've got a crisp technique for it, you're studying the answers, you're using it to inform your next steps. And there are some questions which work better than others. And it's all in the delivery. So having a system which will allow people to record the coaching steps within that will allow these things to go together. So for example, a school might start off with a training session where the technique is modeled and use the visuals of the walkthroughs, and then be able to say to people, so in your coaching on Steplab, you'll be able to, when you have these conversations, you'll know what it is. And the same visuals which you've seen in your training session popping up on the screen will makes it all feel linked and coherent. And doesn't matter which two people are the coach and the coachee around the school, they're all accessing exactly the same visuals again that they saw on the training session. It's all neat and synthesized. Plus, you've got the follow-up and the data. Now, we kind of, I wouldn't say we abandoned, but we're because we're still thinking it's still something we might do a bit of. But in Walkthrus currently, there isn't a way to sort of track exactly what everyone's doing once they've diverged into their kind of individual thing, except to do some sort of pretty standard sort of Google Forms and things like that. So we think where schools have got both systems and the accessing Walkthrus through Steplab, they might find it really helpful to just check in and say who's doing what, and use that to just have information and know. It's so important that people reinforce a teacher's agenda, not constantly set different ones. So it's no good a teacher having the head of department and a member of SLT and a coach all saying different things. If they can access that information by seeing their progress on the Steplab platform and say, I know what you're working on, because there it is. Brilliant. That's power to everybody.
Another thing it might be worth touching on a little bit is like integrating some video stuff as well. So I quickly showed like that the action steps have a kind of video of a teacher doing it. And so, that's really super useful. And we've learned a lot from the Teach Like a Champion approach of being able to show these model videos, but people in the UK don't always love to see Americans modeling action steps. So we've gone and filmed loads in UK schools. But like the holy grail here isn't like watch a video of someone that's not in my school doing it. The gold standard for school leaders who want to have a really, really impactful teacher development program, which kind of raises teachers up to kind of teach all really, really well and kind of all in a similar way, is that teachers not only adapt the content on the Walkthrus content to kind of suit exactly what their own vision of excellence is, change it, build clusters, decide what coaches can set, decide what action steps, but actually that school leaders can film their own videos of excellent practice in their schools and add them on Steplab to underpin the Walkthrus steps or the Steplab steps. So Steplab allows you to do that. It allows school leaders to safely and securely use their phones to film videos of excellent teachers, attach them to the Steplab or the Walkthrus steps, but also importantly, coaches can then film using their phone teachers in practice in their classroom, and you can do a contrasting exercise, right, called a gap analysis in coaching. Here's the video of teacher X from my school. They're fantastic at using show me boards. Let's analyze how they did it. How did you see them kind of cue the students? What kind of question did you ask? This is the video of you and your lesson. What's the difference? And again, like Steplab allows school leaders to kind of introduce that power, the power of video, which again is another way of like really supercharging how much teachers are learning in your sessions.
That's really interesting, actually, because it's one of the things that we've hesitated to do. We have a small number of videos, but because we have users of Walkthrus from early years right the way through to further education, and our view has always been that once you show, and we have half our schools say to us, but is it for primary? And the other half say, but is it for secondary? Because they always assume it can't be for everybody, but it just is. But once you have a video of year threes, your FE teacher doesn't think it's for them. So we've been encouraging people to make their own local videos in their contexts, but to have, if they're Steplab, and they can upload it to that platform rather than having another platform, which there are other platforms, that would be amazing. I think it would be worth telling people now, may I say, about how it will work, because this is in terms of the contractual aspect of it. So this is what we've agreed, because we're all super collaborative with this. All we decided to do was to, once we knew that Steplab could host Walkthrus, and essentially how it works is this: you have to be a Steplab user to access it. If you're also a Walkthrus member, then Steplab will know that, and they'll just activate the box which says access Walkthrus content. So Steplab users who aren't Walkthrus members won't even see it. It just won't be a feature of their access, or it might be grayed out or something. But if you are a Walkthrus member, automatically you'll be able to access it if you're also a Steplab member. So we just have a simple list of all the schools that are members, and we'll just cross-reference it so that it will do. So there's no need to upgrade the software. All we need to know is whether or not you want to use it. So you can tell us, you're a Steplab user. Yes, we'd like to access the walkthroughs, and we're walkthroughs members. And so we'll be just telling Steplab, yep, they're walkthrough subscribers, go. Similarly, we'll have people who are just currently not using Steplab who'll be saying, hey, that looks cool, can we add that? And we'll say, yeah, here's the contact details. Now here's the bonus, big announcement. If you have both systems, at the next point of paying anything, so the next time you sign up for a renewal, it will be 20% less. So let's say you're currently a Steplab user and you haven't joined Walkthrus yet. From the 1st of July, I have to put that in, from July the 1st this year, you could join Walkthrus and pay 20% less. Similarly, the other way around, if you're currently a Walkthrus user and you want to join Steplab and you haven't joined yet, from 1st of July, you could join Steplab and pay 20% less. And then from then on, if you're using both systems, every time you renew either Steplab or Walkthrus, it will continue to be 20% less. And that would be an ongoing discount. So that means it's in your interests to keep both systems going, and in our interests to then develop a collaboration and training. I've seen a comment here about training videos. We once we know how many people are using both, we can decide to devote more resources to supporting the collaboration and how that goes. But the two systems will essentially remain separate. Most of our users will not use Steplab, and most Steplab users probably won't have Walkthrus. But for the people where they do have both, we want to make that as powerful as possible.
And I think for for lots of people who want to make this work in schools as well, having those insights around how they can build a really great PD program from people who have done it or from people who work in schools, it's such a valuable resource. I think, Tom, you picked up earlier on the idea of actually when you do start to build a program that includes things like tracking or includes things like leader analysis and leader insights, what that means is that you can actually, for example, I would see on Steplab as a school leader, I would see things like, oh, a particular area lots of people are working on across my schools. Perhaps that was having pupils listening attentively during modelling, for example. And then because I had those insights, I could then do a session where I sometimes use some of the walkthroughs, downloadable materials where I did a little CPD session with people, and also maybe go and have an assembly with students about what it means to listen well in lessons. And when you have those insights, you can really start building, those more that really holistic program around what it is that's going to really improve your schools. And I think that's what's really lovely about having all of this at your fingertips when you're with both Walkthrus and Steplab, that as a school leader, you can do some really innovative things that are actually really tapped into what your teachers need, what your TAs need, in order to make your school better. And I think that's such a wonderful thing, and not necessarily something that we've had, before now, which is.
No, I totally agree with that. In fact, one of the sort of critiques you hear occasionally from Odd Voices is this their concern. I suppose it's people are entitled to their concerns that this type of approach reduces teacher autonomy. I never ever find that. I go to hundreds of schools, I see hundreds of teachers. I mean, teachers have got so many degrees of freedom that in fact sometimes it's really, really helpful to just say, look, I understand this technique, I've got some steps to push against, and if I do this, then this, then this, it helps me think harder about whether it's going well. There's always flex, there's always context, always, like literally always. But with that complexity, if you've got 10, 15, 20 coaches in a school, all trying to coach well, there are so many degrees of freedom. It's really hard to support each one of those to do a really good job of it. So when you've got a technique, I can just look it up. Okay, so remember when we do the think, pair, share, give some think time, define the question really well, follow up at least two different, follow up one and then another, cold call at the end. You've got techniques. Technique helps teachers think more clearly, more precisely, and then to become more independent and fluid in their teaching. I see that all the time. And if Steplab will add to Walkthrus a depth of precision there and clarity, which we can't do by ourselves. So people are asking all these sort of contract questions, which is totally natural. I mean, we've agreed to a two-step thing. First of all, from 1st of July. So this is our first time we're telling you about the discount. We'll then be emailing all of our users, and so will Steplab. So you've got time to sort of gear up. There's no retrospective anything. So if you just think about the next time, it might be next year. You might just have walkthroughs already and you're not really renewing until next year. That's great. So next year, you'll be able to get your 20% discount. But from the actual link won't be fully populated and ready to roll till start of September. So it will be ready to use from September. So from September 1st or roughly then, you'll be, when you go on Steplab and you've informed Steplab that your walkthroughs signed up and that's all agreed, you'll just find it in Steplab. There it is. And that's how it will work. So it's going to be great. Then we'll have a community of users who are Steplab walkthroughs users, and we'll talk to you and find out how it's going, what you want different, and we'll help you. You'll help us develop it further.
Absolutely. I think that first introduction with walkthroughs and Steplab was how these things evolve over time, and I think both organisations are super open to those conversations. There is some criticism that sometimes comes through with both styles of action steps, which is, how vitally important we know subject specificity is for great teaching. And therefore, this idea that there are steps that perhaps aren't specific to subjects means that they are perhaps in some way lacking. Now, I know from announcements from both walkthroughs and Steplabs that some subject specific content is on its way. But I wonder if we can perhaps talk a little bit about, subject specificity and what that means for coaching, whether that's as steps or what you do with those steps, regardless of the stage you're in.
Well,
take that one.
So yeah, I mean, I think probably both Tom and I can speak to that a little bit. So like, to help teachers get better, the evidence and like lots of my, and I imagine Tom's practical experience as well, suggests that you need a combination of both core teaching practices, and by core, I hate the word generic. And I actually heard Paul Kirshner, a research ed in Sweden very recently, say there's no such thing as subject-specific pedagogy. There's just generic pedagogy that is appropriate for a subject, which I kind of agree with. So let's get rid of the word generic and talk about core. Core teaching strategies are strategies like show me, or think, pair, share, or cold call, which every teacher can probably use, but they'll obviously have to change how they use it depending on their context. And then we need some very pure subject-specific stuff around your curriculum and understanding, your subject knowledge and how you're going to teach your subject. Now, the evidence suggests that what you need is very close to being a 50-50 split. So teachers need to be given the core techniques which they can use to teach effectively, and then they need to be supported to teach their subject effectively too. Now, the important thing though here is that like no teacher can get better if we give them feedback which is too big. That's why both Tom and I have spent a large proportion of our lives trying to boil teaching down into a way that's really granular. Because if it's not granular for teachers, they will not be able to will not be able to change. So basically what we need to do is, whether or not it's subject specific or core, it needs to be granular, specific, and able to be modeled to a teacher. So, I kind of think the subject specific or, what is it subject specific is kind of a moot point, right? It's what the teacher needs, and is it granular enough? That said, I know that walkthroughs are the Emma McRae and other walkthroughs elves are beavering away at the moment on some subject specific content, which will be coming out soon, I think next summer, Tom, in walkthroughs.
Yeah, we've got Inaction books that are being written for all the subjects, primary and secondary. So it's really an Inaction series. We've got the general things, and then from that, the walkthroughs would sort of do a kind of Inaction. But I agree with you. I mean, my experience is this: that when I do a lot of this stuff, I go to schools, and I could be say visiting a year one. You learn to do this stuff. I could go to a school where I work with a year one and year two teachers, and we observe lessons and we discuss what their concerns are and issues are. Another day I might be going to a school and I visit the English department and the history department. And coaching works on the basis that you try to solve problems together. You ask people what the concerns are, you have your expertise. And of course, the subject is always there. It's literally always there. What are you teaching is always part of the conversation. So when you're doing something like show me boards, to use that example again, which questions are you using for that is obviously one of the things to discuss. And so it's always present. But what flows from these conversations is never a set of rigid constraints that you must do this, you must do that. It's always a discussion about what would help you to secure better learning from your students. And sometimes the answer is better questions, which is very subject specific. And at some point you might just say, well, that's not my expertise to decide what those questions are. You're the expert, but you can think about that in this conversation because I'm helping you think through what those questions might be. But so we don't pretend to be experts on every subject, but we do recognize that the subject is ever present. So it's not like it's missing from the conversation. It's never missing from the conversation.
And I think that leads us really nicely on into actually, how do you train great coaches? Because actually the beginning of a great coaching conversation is by saying, this is what we've seen, but what's happening next lesson and how can we do some work that's ready for next lesson? And by the very nature of talking about that next lesson requires focus on what is being taught, because that's kind of where you start, isn't it? So what is in this lesson and how are we going to change the way that that's presented to students to make it better than it was from what we've just seen? So I don't know if one of you want to talk a little bit about, how do you train really great coaches to help them have brilliant coaching conversations, and how does Walkthrus and Steplab help?
We have a number of tools. We've got, so for example, I'll just show, in Walkthrus, people who, I'll just show my screen on the Walkthrus. We have this section here, and there are a number of things. This is a relatively new walkthrough, which is only on the website. Actually, it's not in the books, which is about team coaching and how you take instructional coaching and apply it to groups of people. So that's interesting. So we have like slides and guidance to read. We've got some video of me doing coaching conversations with people after the lesson. So that's been interesting. And that's sort of, this is a partnership with Chiltern Learning Trust, where 10 teachers in each of those videos, you watch them teach a lesson using a specific named technique. So it's clear which technique it is. And then I talk about that afterwards in a sort of 10-minute conversation. And each one of those models the 5-step process of the Bambrick-Centilio feedback instructional coaching. We've got other things like this coaching booklet here. It's got some superb guidance and some nuggets of gold in there. But I suppose that's the main thing for me is this section here. So there's tools and a video of me explaining it. We're a real big fan of the feedback and instructional coaching. So let's say if I'm planning a coaching session, I might use this tool, and it's got precise, praise, probe, identify the problem, and action step, practice, plan ahead. That's the key structure. 5 steps. It comes from the Port Bambrick-Centilio work. You've also got the walkthrough there that the teacher might be working on. You can paste it in, but we have to manually, literally. I mean, a lot of people like this. It's a Google document. You literally take a screenshot and paste it in. It's very organic, but it's very crude as well. Sometimes crude is good because you can edit and do stuff. There's no system constraints there. Steplab will do this for you instead. Like, Steplab will take the process and the steps and be able to record all that. So it's an alternative to that, which is a much more sort of system, sort of mapped. But the basic idea is that you match these two things together. You've got some action steps and you've got a process. So when you're training coach, you're saying, like, what's your process? Give precise praise. So how do you do that? Probe, like get to the bottom of what the issues are. Right? Identify the problem and the action step. How do you do that? Practice. And I know that from Steplab prompts people to like practice, like it comes up as a prompt, like to do it. Like you don't just have to remember it, it prompts you to have you done it. And then when's the next lesson? When's the next meeting? It's all prompted. And so we're all on the same lines in terms of the general process. And here we know that's how we support people to do it. So there's a training need around how to do that well. And we have various tools, like we use a sort of planning document. Some of them are more precise than that. So this one here is like a particular session planner. You might actually hear, we'll do a learning walk with someone and say precise praise. So what would you say to that teacher was precise praise about that step? And we do that. We could watch a video. What probing questions might you have about that lesson? And you can train around how to do it using these tools. But I think with the Steplab, which is much more sophisticated in the way it logs all of these things and prompts you, will allow teachers to go that bit further. So we sort of get towards it in Walkthrus, and it's very organic, and people like chopping these up and designing their own forms. Google's very flexible in that way. But where people are using Steplab, they don't have to do that. They just have it and it's there, and you just can get on with it. And I think that's going to be, people are going to love that.
So we're talking about how we train a coaching team, right? We want, you know, the quality of what instructional coaching can do from you is limited by how good your coaches are at their job, right? A bad coach doesn't help teachers to improve. And so I've struggled with that problem for, like, you know, the last 10 years, which is like, you know, I'm a school leader. I'm currently leading a coaching program in AIM North London. I want coaches to do a good job, but some of them aren't, and some of them are good at one thing. So what we need to do is decide, well, firstly, like, what do we want our coaches to be good at doing, right? We want them to be able to give granular feedback around evidence-based things that suit a teacher. One, we want the coach to be able to model that thing really successfully, or at least show a model that shows it successfully, and then deconstruct that model so the teacher can see what good looks like. We need the coach to help the teacher plan how they're going to make that change in their context, in their subject. We need them to work with the teacher to rehearse that change. And then finally, at the end of that process, we need them to help the teacher to implement it to actually make that change in their classroom. And it's super important that basically that's what coaching needs to contain. Like, if it doesn't contain that stuff, it's unlikely to work as well as it might. And so what Tom's showed you there is, you know, like some forms which help coaches to structure their feedback in that way, right? Like, there's a place to plan the model. There's a place to make sure the rehearsal's good. It might be worth me showing how Steplab supports you to train your coaches.
Yeah,
sorry, Tom.
That's great.
So what we got here is we've got the Steplab Coaching Skills Builder. And so Carrie Fletcher-Wood, who is Steplab's Director of Training, and Peps and I knuckled down and we wrote. So what I wanted was a direct instruction program for being a great coach, like to not leave anything tacit anymore, to take every aspect of being a good coach and to break it down. So what we've got here is 19. These are around 15-minute modules on how to be a great coach. We've got like 4 modules just on rehearsal. What are the foundations of effective rehearsal? How do you rehearse effectively? How do you give feedback? Once the teacher you're rehearsing with nails it, how do you add complexity to the rehearsal so they actually push forward? How do you model? How do you do gap analysis questioning? How do you use praise to lock in, build rapport and mental models? And then underneath each one of these, we have got like a video of like basically me talking about it. And this is me kind of giving the theory and saying why it's important. We've also got a model of
should be listening.
A coach and a teacher working together to do that thing. We've got an evidence summary, we've got things to read. And once the coach has read that, there's a quiz. And then there's a reflection task. And so the idea behind this is me as a leading coaching my school, I watch coaching happening, and as will inevitably happen, I determine that I'm not happy about the quality of rehearsal going on. I will assign rehearsal part 1, and every coach will spend the 15 minutes doing that week. And then the next week I'll assign rehearsal part 2, or I'll decide, actually, I didn't really see any good modeling today, or I don't think modeling's happening, or let's focus a bit more on the positive and do praise. And so what this does is that it allows you to train your coaches up slowly over time in the kind of what we might call the core skills of being an effective coach.
Brilliant.
No, I think it's exciting because it's interesting. You develop stuff that we haven't, and that's what collaboration's about, isn't it? Right? It's sort of you've got all that system end stuff which you're so focused on coaching, And like I say, a lot of our work is about designing a whole PD program and which techniques to focus on and how you run training. And we're always encouraging schools to make time across the year and look about their calendars and where training happens and where all that structural stuff, and thinking about the solving the learning problems. We stress that over and over again. You don't start going around going, oh, where can I use this technique? You know, you sort of, you analyze the issues, you know, what are they? But the truth is that often schools will, you know, people would like to project this idea that it's all so individualized. It so often isn't. You know, most days I go to a school, there are very common issues that teachers have because teaching has similar difficulties, and it's really powerful to have you know, a common core. At the same time, when our schools do their cluster, we could have 50 schools in a group of schools making a cluster. No two are the same, even though they've got a lot in common, because the way that they conceive of the problems is different to them, but not so different that it's unrecognizable. And I find that so interesting.
And I think this is where this collaboration came from, really, isn't it? Is that we have the same purpose, which is to help schools get better. And I think that's why the collaboration is important, because it's working out from our perspective, from Walkthrus and Steplab, what is it that we can do that will help schools. And on that note, I think, you know, we've heard about the content and we've heard about analysis and leadership insights and how we can train our coaches and all those kinds of things. But ultimately, our theory about how we want great PD to happen sometimes doesn't come into practice because schools are noisy and busy. So one of the things that from a really practical side is, whilst all this sounds wonderful, how on earth do we make that work in a busy school or in a busy school week? So what I'd really love is to hear some examples, maybe some case studies of schools who have made this work, and maybe some of the practical ways that they have, you know, shaped their PD programs. They have time for teachers and leaders to really engage in this in a really effective way.
Oh wow, we have so many examples. It's one of the things that we do with, say, like groups of schools that you might have, say, I don't know, like 30 schools in Reading, and they come onto Zoom calls, and we talk to them and say, what are you working on? They'll compare stories, and we have this design decisions process, 6 design decisions, which teams, which individuals, and then what's your learning focus? And it's the common language around that is so useful, like the names of the techniques, the names of the process, the names of the coaching steps. The fact that they're all using the same coaching system really helps them. And then we talk about reality check processes. How are you doing learning walks? Are you doing peer observation? And is that structured? And all these decisions need to be made. And where we find the best success is where all of those things are done really precisely. Like literally, here's our calendar for the year. Here's when the coaching, here's when the CPD will be. Here's our cluster of techniques. We've thought about it, and there's been staff buy-in into what is in that core set. Here's the way we're going to do the coaching with this process. And it's really clear. Clarity and precision makes things happen. And from that, teachers can then springboard into being individuals. So I was at school recently where they had this, like, they've been working this for 18 months. You go lesson to lesson to lesson. Their core techniques are strongly embedded in every room. And every teacher is an individual expressing themselves. I think it's just so interesting to see how the structure and system aspect allows teachers to be so individual. And anyone who worries about these systems locking people into some formulaic teaching, it's just never how it works. It's just not how it works. So I mean, I don't have any specific individual case studies, but we just have so many examples of this bespoke nature of all these tools, both Steplab and we have to say, I'm so excited about this because we have a lot of Walkthrus schools who also have Steplab, and we also hear about that. And sometimes they even in their mind, they're not quite sure whether to do this or this, but now they don't have to choose. They just be able to go all in the same framework. So you can start with a Walkthrus cluster, go into a Steplab coaching thing, or all sorts of different routes through. Will be interesting for us to find, you know, do you see yourself as mainly using Steplab with some Walkthrus steps, or mainly using walkthroughs with some Steplab tools to help that. We'll be interested to find out how people see it, and then we'll respond to that.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. Actually, there's some I've got two kind of quick case studies in my mind, and really they're implementation case studies, right? Like so in the last two schools I implemented or tried, implemented coaching, we went for a kind of like I always call it like a total war approach, because basically like everyone's involved. So what I mean by that is I want every teacher to both be a coach and a coachee. Like I want even my trainee teachers to learn how to coach kind of on the job, right? I pair everyone up, and I obviously have to put in loads of training and make sure the systems are really tight. And that's one of the reasons why I built Steplab. Now, what does that do? Well, firstly, it's low cost, right? Because everyone's doing it. It barely takes anyone any time every week. And that's one of the benefits of that. I'm going to contrast this. And the second thing is it's really culture building. And like, there's some pretty good evidence that kind of total peer coaching program, like it's a kind of rising tide raises all ships effect. And, it really does pay out in the evidence of this, like improves culture and ultimately improves teaching too. And also it's really time efficient because you're asking very little of everyone. Now that's model one. Now I can see there are some TED Rag people on the call. Mm-hmm. We've got Siobhan Meredith, who's at Marine Primary, and absolutely fantastic. Hello, Siobhan, how you doing? They're I think both they're one of the dual user schools and have used Steplab right since the beginning when we first, for years now. And so TED Rag don't have that approach. They handpick a team of coaches and they actually put time, in the timetable, and coaches, they really invest in like this group of coaches having the time to do it. And what that means is like, yes, it's potentially a little bit more, costly for the school to get right. But what it does do is mean that every coach is doing a fantastic job. Now, I don't know which of these is the best approach, but it's important to say that like you can do it in the A model and have some benefits. You can do it with the B model. And like, to be fair, TED Rag are absolutely rocketing up in terms of like the outcomes of the trust. They're doing so well, but like you can use Steplab and Walkthrus to do these things. Basically, it's flexy. You can implement it how you like and do it in a way that kind of works best for you.
And we've seen some great examples, like, having coaching time happening, all these conversations happening during an assembly, and SLT runs the assembly so other people can go off and do some coaching, or redistributing directed time, or, or as the example there, bringing things into time. I think it's all about how you can kind of be innovative with the time that you've got over the course of a year. But if you know this is a PD approach that is most likely to make a difference, you prioritize and work out how to make time based on that. So I think a lot of my questions have been covered, because one of the things I was going to ask, and you may want to talk a bit more about this, is if any of you have read the most recent Ofsted report on PD, doesn't make the nicest reading, or some of a lot of the research that comes out about PD in schools, like the Curie report that looked at like 1 or 2% of PD makes any difference to children in the classroom. So I guess I'm interested in, if I've got a budget and I've only got a certain amount of money to spend, what makes these programs more likely to make a difference in my school to my teachers, if so much of PD doesn't work the way we want it to?
Well, I think both Tom and I have focused on doing what does work. We're taking evidence-based techniques, we're breaking them down to the hyper-granular, so they're easy to implement even though teachers struggle, and we're focusing on mechanisms of PD that work. Like, it doesn't need to be instructional coaching. As Tom said, there's lots of ways to skin a cat, and schools shouldn't only do instructional coaching. They need to have a whole PD program too, right? You need both things. But whatever you do, whether you're doing whole group PD or coaching, it needs to have modeling. It needs to have rehearsal, and we need to build teachers' insights about how and why techniques work. When should I use a show me board? When shouldn't I use a show me board? And I think, that's the reason why we're so happy to be doing this partnership, is I think both Tom and I at Steplab are focusing on what the research suggests works and ignoring what I don't think works particularly well.
Yeah, and I agree. We're big fans of the Education Endowment Foundation mechanisms research, which are like 14 mechanisms which are present in effective PD. We feel Walkthrus delivers all 14. But but you don't do them all at once. You know, there are things to do with motivation through goal setting, and there's things to do with modeling techniques, there's things to do with building on prior knowledge and so on. And there's all these things work. And so that it's the thing of the clarity of the techniques and the thing of keep coming back to them. And that's the thing. I mean, I recently have been developing, and I find myself saying it all the time, my PD, the sort of tennis player analogy, which is that, you know, there are certain things you always use all the time when you're playing tennis, and you don't sort of just park them and say, you know, tennis players don't go to a kind of tricks and tips of the week briefing. You know, that's just not how it gets better. You don't get better at teaching by that. You're constantly working on certain aspects of your practice until they become really good habits, and you try to break bad habits, and then you try to link things together more fluidly and respond to different situations more intelligently. And all of that is like teaching, situational assessment, what steps do I use, and then having the skill, the technique to use it exactly when you need it. So that's what we're trying to do. And a lot of questions are coming, which in all honesty, we don't know the answer to yet. So we haven't exactly, we're trying to be very kind of flexible with it, so people can dip in and out of our systems, because that's how it's going to work in practice. And we're trying to make it attractive with a 20% discount, so it's cost effective. My view of the cost is, you know, if you think about the cost of teacher recruitment and retention and supply teachers and all of the rest of it, you know, if you add in, you know, what amounts to, you know, a couple of £1,000 a year on top of a teacher budget, you think it's an absolute drop in the ocean in what you're spending, and the power it delivers in terms of making teachers feel good. We know from our users and from Steplab users, they love it. It makes people happy about doing training, and that's good. You know, it's all good. So through this collaboration, we'll support each other to develop our own systems, and where schools are using both, they'll get the best of both worlds, we think, and we'll see how it goes. But let's see how that, in terms of just signing up, you know, we will be emailing on both sides. Is this something you need or want?
Yeah.
Some information, and then we'll just have a whole roster of schools who've said yes to both, and then those schools will have it ready to roll from September. And then, as it seems to be coming up in the chat here, I think we need to make some videos to explain it all, but that will come down the track.
Absolutely. So I think we're gonna end it there. Thank you so much, Josh and Tom, after the grilling that I've given you. Thank you all so much for joining us, because I think, you know, together we can do some really brilliant things in our schools, and I'm so pleased that so many people are keen and interested in the difference that we can make to schools and to our teachers. So thank you so much. You will receive a recording of this webinar, as well as an email with some fine details around things like demos and sign-ups and renewals and discounts and all of those things. So thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of this beautifully sunny, I hope, in all areas, maybe some thunderstorms, evening. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks everyone.